Bottle. So Mustafa will now speak for 10 minutes.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah, amma ba'd. Thanks for that, Dr. Peter Barnes. First, I'd just like to mention quickly, inshallah, that Paul was accused of apostasy and heresy when he came among those Jews from Jerusalem with his newfound doctrine. Those Jewish Christians who were associated with Jesus and those who knew the Mosaic law and teachings of Jesus heard about this newfound doctrine. They accused Paul of apostasy and heresy. This could be found in Acts chapter 21, verse 21, where he says, "And they are informed of thee, that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs." Was Paul guilty of that? Remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, that whoever breaks one of the least commandments is considered the least in the kingdom of heaven. And also in Matthew chapter 23, verse 1 to 3, where Jesus is reported to have said, "The scribes and the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not hereafter their works, for they say and do not." Jesus upheld the law, not abrogated it. He didn't abrogate the law. Was Paul guilty of that charge in Acts chapter 21, verse 21? He was. Go to Galatians chapter 5, verse 2. "Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing." In other words, you are still following the law, and Jesus paid that price. And if you are still keeping the law, Christ shall profit you nothing. And he also mentions, as I also mentioned in my talk, that circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing but keeping of the commandments of God. Keeping commandments of God is the law of Moses. You see the double standard here? Circumcision is an everlasting covenant in Genesis chapter 17. And in Genesis chapter 17, verse 14, it mentions that he will be cut off if he does not do it. And just a quick point on this heresy charge. Concerning this heresy charge in Acts 21:21, if you go to Acts 24, chapter 24, verse 14, look what Paul says now, with all due respect. "But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets." Jesus warned about lip service, not practicing what you preached, in Mark chapter 7, verse 6 to 13. Also, Dr. Peter Barnes quoted from Mark, where the Gospel of Mark, where he says, "What goes onto the person cannot defile him, make him unclean." Trying to show that all foods are lawful. But if Jesus really said that, then if Jesus had declared, then his disciples would have followed the same teachings. But however, in Acts of the Apostles, the disciples all together decided, and Paul along with them, and the Holy Spirit also with them, all agreed that a Christian must stay away from 4 things: the blood of the animal, meat of the strangled animals, the food offered to idols, and from sexual immorality. Disciples agreed. Also Paul and the Holy Spirit. If Jesus had truly said all food is clean and you can now eat anything, then why is the Holy Spirit and the disciples and Paul all agreeing you must stay away from these 4 things? All these 4 things are prohibited in Islam because we still uphold the law. And the Jews as well, they also, this is prohibited for them. If we understand the original Christianity, this is my point here, if we understand the original Christianity, if we do some historical research, we see that really it belongs to Islam, but it's not followed today because people have it in the backs of their minds that some things which which Paul said, he said you can eat all foods, letters to the Romans in chapter 14. He declared that all foods are clean. This is why when Mark was writing his gospel, he put it in the mouth of Jesus, because the gospels, and I'll prove that the gospels are after the letters of Paul, because if Paul is true, Jesus had already said the same thing. Because if Paul is true and he said all foods are clean, then Jesus must have already said that before him. That is why it's there. But we can see Jesus didn't truly say it. He didn't truly say it. Because then we have this issue in Acts. The 4 things which they agreed to keep away from. Therefore, if Jesus really said it, I don't think the disciples would have forgotten. Otherwise, the disciples would have known it. And if they have forgotten it, let's say they did forget it, surely the Holy Spirit would have remembered. And if he had forgotten, why would Paul agree with them? You must stay away from these 4 things, which I already mentioned. The fellowship that Dr. Peter Barnes mentioned. That Peter gives Paul his right hand of fellowship. Okay, Paul says, disciples gave me the right hand of fellowship. Okay, where Paul says that the disciples acknowledged me, they gave me the hand of fellowship, keep in mind that it's Paul saying it. He is his own witness, but we don't have statements by the disciples saying it. What we have is Paul's own testimony. What we are left with is that Paul is his own witness. He says, they disciples acknowledge me. He says, they consider me to be true. That they gave me a task to preach to the Gentiles. But that is Paul's own testimony. And his works against him, because what he has taught is shown to be different and contrary to what Jesus taught and what the original disciples of Jesus taught. Regarding 2 Peter, Dr. Peter Barnes quoted 2 Peter. I did mention in my talk that 2 Peter, it's agreed upon by ancient and modern New Testament scholars that it is not by Peter. Now you might have a minority view, but according to the consensus view, it is not by Peter. The Illustrated Bible Handbook, edited by Edward Blair, he says, the writer of 2 Peter is unknown and was probably a Gentile Christian who wrote it around 100 to 150 CE. Knowing that Peter died in early part of 1st century, we realize that this document was written decades after Peter, although it claims to be written by Peter himself. Although it does claim it was written by Peter himself. Bruce Metzger, in his book, The New Testament Background, Growth and Content, on page 258 writes, in the light of such internal and external evidence, one must conclude 2 Peter was drawn sometime after 81 CE by an admirer of Peter who wrote the name of the great disciple in order to give his letter great authority. This is according to Bruce Metzger, and he wasn't part of the Jesus Seminar. He was a conservative Christian scholar. I would mention also, I'd just like to mention quickly who was Paul. Yep. I'd just like to mention who was Paul. I've still got about a minute, 2 minutes. Okay, as far as we know, he was not a disciple of Jesus. Not follower of Jesus while he walked the earth. Paul was known as a persecutor of Christians. It is known to us they had a vision on the road to Damascus where Jesus appeared to him. Jesus gave him a message to preach to the world. Paul then became a disciple of Jesus, not by meeting him in his lifetime, but by having a vision of Jesus in the sky. Did Paul see Jesus or something else? How can we be sure he didn't see something else? Paul said he had some disciples with him, reported in the Acts of the Apostles. But these stories in the Acts of the Apostles, the stories are inconsistent. There are inconsistencies. The reports are inconsistent. And I will show you, inshallah. We have to ask, did Paul really